Have you ever wondered how someone can disappear, literally, without a trace? The story you're about to hear is a puzzle, a maze with no exit, that has fascinated investigators, journalists, and even enthusiasts for over 50 years. It's about a man, or at least, a figure we know as the Zodiac, a killer who terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area in the 60s and 70s. But what makes him even more chilling isn't just his crimes, but the mystery he left behind. Imagine living during that time, in a vibrant and ever-changing city, and suddenly facing a killer who not only takes lives, but plays with your mind. A criminal who isn't satisfied with causing harm, but writes letters to newspapers, taunting the police, challenging the press, and sending cryptograms no one can solve. The question everyone asked then was, who is this man, and why is he doing this? But what if the real question we should ask is, why was he never caught? Years ago, I became interested in this story, not just because of the brutality of his crimes, but because of the intelligence behind every move. The Zodiac seemed to know exactly how to stay one step ahead of the authorities, challenging everything we thought we knew about criminal behavior. And the more I delved into the case, the more I wondered, how could someone disappear like that? How is it that they never found this man, despite all the clues he left behind? Today, I want to invite you to join me on this journey, to explore with me every one of the most intriguing and eerie aspects of this case. We'll go over the details of the murders, the letters, the codes, and the theories that have emerged over the years. But beyond the facts, I ask you to think about what this case represents. How can a person become such a larger-than-life myth, a specter that continues to haunt our collective consciousness without ever being caught? Is the Zodiac a killer who hid so well that he will never be found, or is there something more to this story that we have yet to understand? There's something fascinating about unsolved mysteries, don't you think? They draw us in because, in a sense, they confront us with our own vulnerability, with the idea that we don't always have all the answers. The case of the Zodiac is precisely that, a reminder that despite our technological advances and investigative methods, some crimes simply remain in the dark, leaving more questions than answers in their wake. And it's that uncertainty that we're going to explore in this video. I'll tell you the details of the crimes, the clues left behind, and the theories that have emerged over the years. But I'll also leave you with some questions that may never be answered. Because, after all, the Zodiac Killer remains an enigma. A killer who, with each letter and each murder, forced us to face the terror of the unknown. So, if you're ready, let's begin this journey together. I warn you, it's not an easy story to digest. It's disturbing, enigmatic, and, above all, real. And perhaps, by the end, you'll find yourself asking the same questions I asked at the beginning. How is it possible that someone like this managed to elude justice? Or perhaps, he was never meant to be caught. The Zodiac Killer story. It all began on December 20th, 1968, in a small town called Vallejo, California. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, two teenagers aged 16 and 17, were enjoying a quiet evening together. They were parked on a desolate road, doing what many teenagers of that era did, spending some alone time, away from the world. No one could have predicted that this would be their last night alive. A car pulled up beside them, a shadow emerged from the vehicle, and without saying a word, the attacker opened fire. In seconds, the tranquility was shattered, and the scene was filled with screams and terror. David died instantly, while Betty Lou tried to run but was gunned down a few meters away. That night would mark the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. This was the first murder attributed to the Zodiac Killer, though at that time, no one knew what was coming. It was only the beginning. 6 months later, in the early hours of July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were in a secluded parking lot, enjoying their time together. Suddenly, a car pulled up and stopped behind them. Again, the same pattern, the attacker got out of the vehicle and shot them mercilessly. Darlene died on the spot, but Michael, though seriously wounded, survived. He later provided a description of the attacker, a white man, around 25 to 30 years old, stocky, and wearing glasses. It seems simple, right? A killer on the loose, a defined modus operandi, a pattern that the police could track. But the Zodiac wasn't a common criminal. His crimes weren't just about death, they revolved around a twisted psychological game. Just weeks after the Vallejo murders, the first of the infamous Zodiac letters arrived. An envelope with a strange cryptogram was sent to 3 local newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. In these letters, the killer introduced himself as Zodiac, a name that would forever be associated with terror. Each letter contained a coded message and an open taunt to the police. But what was most unsettling wasn't just the fact that he communicated with the media, it was that he seemed to enjoy the chaos he was causing. In the first letter, Zodiac demanded that the newspapers publish the cryptogram on their front pages. If they didn't, he threatened to kill again. Can you imagine the pressure? The authorities were caught in a dilemma. Should they obey a killer and give in to his demands, or ignore him and risk more deaths? In the end, the letters were published, and thousands of people tried to decipher the puzzle. But only one couple, a pair of teachers, managed to solve the code, at least partially. What they discovered was disturbing. The cryptogram read, and I quote, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild animals in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all." Here, it began to become clear that the Zodiac was not just a serial killer, he was a calculating predator who enjoyed the fear he caused. With each murder, the Zodiac seemed to grow bolder, more provocative. On September 27, 1969, the story took an even darker turn when Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were attacked near Lake Berryessa. The Zodiac appeared with a black hood, adorned with his sinister symbol, a cross inside a circle, resembling a telescopic sight. He gagged both young people and repeatedly stabbed them. Cecilia died, but Brian managed to survive, though seriously injured. What made the Zodiac terrifying wasn't just the brutality of his attacks, but the way he toyed with the police and the media. After this attack, the killer called the police station from a payphone, confessing to the crime with chilling calm. And then, as if it were a macabre game, he vanished again. In the following months, the Zodiac would continue to send letters, codes, and more threats. But why did this killer choose to play with the minds of his victims and an entire city? What drove him to seek not only death, but also psychological terror? And here's where our first great mystery arises. With so much data, descriptions, and clues, why were they never able to catch him? Even today, more than half a century later, the case remains unsolved. Some theories suggest the Zodiac was somehow linked to law enforcement, while others connect him to dark government secrets or even strange cults. But what if it was all much simpler? What if the Zodiac was just a man, extremely cunning, who knew exactly how to manipulate the system and play with the limits of the law? The truth is that, despite everything, they never managed to identify him. Each letter that arrived at the newspapers left investigators more perplexed. Some contained clues, others indecipherable codes, and sometimes just taunts at those trying to hunt him down. By then, the press was fully caught up in this cat-and-mouse game, and so was the public. However, the Zodiac didn't stop there. In October 1969, just 2 weeks after the attack at Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac claimed another life. This time, it was Paul Stein, a San Francisco taxi driver. The killer shot him in the head at point-blank range, but what was most unsettling was that he took the time to cut a piece of Stein's shirt to send in his next letter. It wasn't enough to kill, the Zodiac needed the world to know it was him. The police arrived at the crime scene shortly after, but a crucial mistake caused them to miss the chance to catch him. An initial description had confused him with a black man, and when officers passed by a white man who perfectly matched the Zodiac's description, they let him go. This is where the second mystery emerges. How could he escape so many times? How is it possible that in such a well-patrolled city, a man could slip through the shadows again and again, outwitting the authorities? Was it pure luck, or did he have something more in his favor? The victims and the baffling crimes. The Zodiac Killer case isn't just the story of an anonymous killer who sneaks through the night. It's a story of people, of lives cut short in moments of absolute vulnerability. Each of his victims was someone with dreams, with plans for the future, but the Zodiac decided those futures would never come. One of the most baffling things about this killer is the lack of a clear pattern in his victims. There was no specific category that united them, not their age, gender, or occupation. Anyone who crossed the Zodiac's path could be his next victim. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. Often, when we hear about serial killers, there's a sense that, somehow, we can avoid being victims if we understand their motivations or attack patterns. But with the Zodiac, that wasn't possible. His choice of victims seemed random, which heightened the terror among the population. The story that haunts me the most is Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard's, who were simply enjoying a sunny afternoon by Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969. Imagine this, a peaceful place, a young couple relaxing by the water, thinking of nothing but the present moment. But without warning, a shadow approached, and what began as a perfect afternoon turned into a living nightmare. The Zodiac, wearing a black hood with a white symbol in the center, approached the couple. He pointed a gun at them and ordered them to tie each other up. Brian, thinking they might survive if they complied, did as he was told. What followed was pure brutality. The Zodiac repeatedly stabbed both of them. Cecilia, with more wounds than Brian, didn't survive, but Brian somehow did. He was one of the few survivors who could provide a detailed description of the attacker, but even with that information, the police could never catch him. What was the Zodiac really after? Was it just the act of killing that gave him satisfaction, or was it the fear he sowed that truly fed him? This is where our first mystery arises. What was the real purpose behind these crimes? Was it just a killer seeking notoriety, or was there something deeper, more disturbing, in his motivations? Shortly after this attack, another letter arrived at the newspapers. This time, it contained the most famous cryptogram associated with the Zodiac, one that, to this day, has left cryptographers and experts around the world perplexed. Through those incomprehensible symbols, the killer seemed to enjoy watching how the city of San Francisco and its surroundings plunged into a state of paranoia. Each new letter, each new code, was like another piece of a puzzle no one could solve. Meanwhile, death continued to lurk. On October 11, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the heart of the city. Paul Stein, a 29-year-old taxi driver, picked up his last passenger that night. As he drove through the streets of Presidio Heights, one of San Francisco's most luxurious areas, the passenger shot him point blank in the head. This crime was different from the previous ones. There were no prior threats, no secluded location. The murder happened on a busy street, right in the city center. What made it even more terrifying was that after killing Paul, the Zodiac cut off a piece of his shirt to send as proof in his next letter to the newspapers. That detail still shocks me to this day. He wasn't just a killer who wanted to disappear into the darkness. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the world to know what he had done. The Zodiac wasn't just killing. He needed everyone to know it was him. But why? What did he gain from that notoriety? And here arises another mystery. Was it just an insatiable ego, or was there an even more twisted mind behind it all? The letter that followed Paul Stein's murder was one of the most provocative. In it, the Zodiac openly mocked the police, saying they had been just minutes away from catching him. And, in fact, that was true. In the confusion during the suspect description, the responding officers passed by the killer, not knowing he was the man they were searching for. He simply slipped past them, walking down the street like anyone else, while the city trembled with horror. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game between the Zodiac and the police, with the press acting as an intermediary. Each letter he sent not only contained new threats, but also clues, cryptograms, and macabre details of his crimes. As public attention grew, so did the Zodiac's audacity. He knew the entire city was watching him, and he seemed to relish the power it gave him. In 1970, the Zodiac's letters began to get stranger. In one of them, he mentioned the idea of building a death machine, a device he could use to cause more mass destruction. Although there was no evidence he was actually building something like that, the mere mention of it sowed even more fear among the population. One of the most perplexing aspects of the case is the number of suspects that emerged over the years. The police investigated hundreds of people, from professors to vagrants, and although some of them fit the profile, none could be conclusively linked to the crimes. Arthur Lee Allen, one of the most well-known suspects, was thoroughly investigated, but the lack of concrete evidence made his arrest impossible. Even after his death in 1992, the Zodiac mystery remained unsolved. What troubles me the most is the sense that the Zodiac was never caught. Although many believe he may have died, others think he simply stopped, faded into the crowd, and lived the rest of his life as a normal person without ever paying for the crimes he committed. The idea that such a ruthless killer could have lived among us, undiscovered, is terrifying. But beyond the murders and the letters, what torments me the most is the lack of closure for the victims' families. How can you live knowing that the person who killed your loved one was never caught? That despite all efforts, there was never justice. That uncertainty, that lack of answers, is something that still resonates in the minds of those who lived through those years of terror. The Zodiac Killer's story is not just a chronicle of brutal crimes, but also a tale of frustration, helplessness, and fear. The victims and their families were trapped in a narrative that never had a clear ending, and we, as spectators, can only imagine the horror they must have felt during those moments. The investigations, a never-ending maze. The investigation of the Zodiac Killer case was, from the beginning, a process fraught with frustration. While authorities had the advantage of letters, symbols, and, in some cases, witnesses, they never managed to find a lead that would take them directly to the killer. What seemed to be a clear path to resolving a case quickly turned into a dark maze, full of false hopes and dead ends. I remember when I first delved into the details of the investigation. I encountered a tangle of disconnected facts, theories, and a general confusion that only heightened my sense of hopelessness. If investigators, with all their resources, could not make progress, what hope was there for others to understand what really happened? The first obstacle was the nature of the killer himself. The Zodiac was not only brutal but also intelligent. Instead of leaving obvious traces, he took pleasure in toying with the authorities, sending letters to newspapers and giving clues that seemed designed more to confuse than to help. His encrypted messages were one of the biggest proofs of this nature. Each code he sent seemed to be a taunt, a sign that, while the police continued searching for answers, he would always be one step ahead. One of the Zodiac's most famous cryptograms, known as the Z340, remained unsolved for over 50 years. Imagine that, a simple code that, in theory, should have provided a valuable clue but kept cryptography experts baffled for decades. How clever must you be to create a message that even the best cryptographers in the world cannot decipher? That's the kind of intellect the investigators were dealing with. And while some of his letters were deciphered, what they revealed only added to the confusion. In one of them, the Zodiac claimed to be collecting slaves for the afterlife. It was such a bizarre and unsettling claim that it made one wonder if they were truly dealing with a cold, calculating killer or someone whose sense of reality was completely distorted. This was another of the mysteries surrounding him. Was he a disturbed genius or simply a monster who enjoyed the idea of sowing chaos? What troubled the police the most was the lack of conclusive fingerprints. In several of the crimes, physical evidence was found, but none led to a clear suspect. There were witness descriptions, like the famous Zodiac image after Paul Stein's murder, but each new lead seemed to hit a brick wall. One of the most crucial elements of the investigation was the search for a psychological profile. Over the years, many criminal psychology experts tried to delve into the Zodiac's mind. They attempted to unravel what motivated him, what made him choose his victims, and why he felt the need to communicate with the media. The profiles were varied, but they all agreed on one thing: the Zodiac enjoyed power. Not just the power to take lives, but the power to control the narrative. He knew that the more information he provided, the more control he would have over the investigation. And in some way, that gave him an advantage. But the most bewildering thing of all was the list of suspects. During the investigation, hundreds of people were interviewed, dozens of cases were investigated, and still, the true killer was never identified. One of the main suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, a man who seemed to fit many aspects of the Zodiac profile. Allen had a criminal history, lived near the areas where the murders occurred, and, most unsettlingly, was identified by several witnesses as the possible killer. However, despite all these coincidences, there was never conclusive evidence linking him directly to the crimes. It's incredible to think about the number of people who were suspects over the years. From professors to factory workers, each new lead opened the door to an exhaustive investigation, only to result in nothing. Somehow, the Zodiac always managed to slip through the shadows, as if he knew exactly how to avoid being caught. And as the years passed, the case grew colder and colder, becoming one of the greatest criminal enigmas in history. One of the most shocking moments in the investigation was when the police had the opportunity to capture the Zodiac but let him slip away. This happened after Paul Stine's murder, the taxi driver. The officers responded to the crime scene quickly and, in a twist of fate, passed by the Zodiac without stopping him. It was a mistake in the description provided by the witnesses, who initially thought the killer was a black man. When the correction came, it was too late. The Zodiac had vanished into the crowd. This incident represented one of the greatest frustrations of the investigation, and it's not hard to imagine the level of guilt and regret the officers must have felt. Knowing they were so close to capturing him, only to lose him due to a misunderstanding, must have been devastating. Over time, the Zodiac Killer gradually faded from public view. Although he never ceased to be a topic of interest, his crimes became part of the past, a dark history that many tried to forget. But for the families of the victims, the lack of answers remained a constant pain. How is it possible to move forward knowing that the killer of your loved one is still out there, having never paid for his crimes? The frustration of investigators was also palpable. Over the years, there were moments when it seemed they were finally close to solving the case, only for something to go wrong. At one point, the FBI even became involved in the case, but despite their efforts and resources, the outcome was the same: nothing. Over the years, many theories about the Zodiac's identity have been proposed. Some believe he was a man with mental issues who was eventually institutionalized. Others think he simply stopped killing and faded into normalcy, living the rest of his life as an ordinary person. But the most disturbing possibility is that the Zodiac continued to commit crimes, but in a more discreet manner, without the same desire for notoriety as in his earlier years. As the decades passed, the physical evidence in the case also began to deteriorate. Fingerprints, DNA samples, and other crucial elements of the investigation were no longer as useful as they would have been at the time. With each passing year, the chance of catching the killer diminished, and the Zodiac story slowly slipped into obscurity. However, despite the lack of progress, the case has never been officially closed. Current detectives still keep an open file, hoping that one day, a new lead or a breakthrough in forensic technology will finally reveal the truth. Perhaps someday, the mystery of the Zodiac will be solved, and the victims' families can finally find some peace. But until then, the Zodiac investigation will remain one of the most perplexing and frustrating criminal cases in history. And this brings us to the final question: will we ever truly know the identity of the Zodiac Killer, or will his legacy of terror and mystery remain forever in the shadows? The Zodiac investigations were like a bottomless pit. The deeper the investigators dug, the more the truth seemed to slip away. In the end, all that remained was a tangle of theories and suspects, but no clear answers. Could it be that the Zodiac was more cunning than all of them, or did he simply have luck on his side? The final letters and the growing mystery. The Zodiac Killer's letters are undoubtedly one of the most unsettling aspects of this case. What began as a killer committing violent crimes quickly transformed into a macabre game of media manipulation, with authorities and the press as pawns on his board. And I, like many others who have investigated this case, couldn't help but feel trapped by the darkness of his communication, by the cold, calculated way each word seemed to serve a purpose, a hidden message. The first letters sent by the Zodiac were filled with arrogance. In them, he detailed his murders with chilling precision, as if he wanted to ensure that the police and the public understood that he was behind it all. The most chilling part was the way he described his crimes, not with remorse or regret, but with a kind of satisfaction. His words were a constant reminder that he was in control, that he relished the attention he received. I remember reading one of his first letters, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. In it, the Zodiac not only detailed the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, but also included a cryptogram, a code that, according to him, would reveal his identity if deciphered. This was one of the first times he showed his penchant for puzzles, one of the tactics he would repeatedly use to confuse the police and cryptographers around the world. Although that cryptogram was eventually solved, what it revealed was not his name but a disturbing confession that he was killing because it was fun. It said, "I like killing people because it is so much fun," a phrase that chilled me to the bone. And here is where we begin to see the true nature of the Zodiac. He was not just a serial killer, but someone who enjoyed the power he had over the narrative, over the lives of his victims, and over the fear he instilled in the community. But the most fascinating thing is how the letters changed over time. As his thirst for attention grew, so did his arrogance. On November 8, 1969, the Zodiac sent another letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, including one of his most enigmatic cryptograms, known as the Z340. For years, this code was an unsolved mystery. Cryptographers around the world tried to decipher it unsuccessfully until finally, in 2020, a group of experts managed to unravel its content. However, what it revealed was as baffling as everything else in the case. The message contained no clues about his identity but another vague statement about his pleasure in killing and his disdain for authorities. It said something like, "I hope you are having fun trying to catch me. I don't fear the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise faster." It was as if he reveled in the confusion he created, as if his goal was not only to evade justice but to leave an indelible mark on collective memory. Curiously, despite his apparent need for attention, the Zodiac was selective with his letters. He did not write after every murder, and the letters he did send seemed to have a specific purpose. Sometimes, it seemed he just wanted to remind the public that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows. At other times, he used his letters to mock the police or to divert attention to new theories and suspicions. And, occasionally, he would throw out phrases hinting at an even darker obsession. In one letter sent to the Los Angeles Times, he claimed to have a bomb detonator, which caused mass panic in the city. Although no evidence was ever found to prove he actually had a bomb, his threat showed how unpredictable he could be. The famous October 1969 letter also left a deep mark on the investigation. In it, the Zodiac mentions that he had escaped from the police after the murder of taxi driver Paul Stein. This particular letter is especially chilling because it details how the police had the opportunity to catch him but let him go. It is hard to imagine the level of frustration the authorities must have felt knowing they were so close, but failed. The Zodiac, of course, did not miss the opportunity to mock them, saying that he laughed while he drove away from the scene. As time passed, the letters became more spaced out but no less unsettling. In 1974, the Zodiac sent his last confirmed letter, referring to the film The Exorcist as the best satirical comedy he had ever seen. This statement is perplexing, not only for its tone but because it seemed the Zodiac had shifted from focusing on his crimes to critiquing popular culture. This letter was seen by many as a sign that the Zodiac was losing interest in his games with the press and the police. However, as with everything related to this case, nothing is definitive. Why did the letters stop? Was it because the Zodiac no longer felt the need to provoke? Or did he simply grow tired of the game? This is one of the major enigmas that persist in the case. Some theories suggest that the Zodiac may have died or been imprisoned for another crime. Other theories propose that he simply changed tactics, continuing his crimes in a more quiet manner without the need for attention. What intrigues me most is the impact these letters had on the investigation and on the public's perception of the Zodiac. The more letters he sent, the more mystique he created around himself. Each new communication was analyzed down to the last detail, in the hope of finding a clue that would finally lead to his capture. But what the Zodiac did was the opposite. Instead of bringing authorities closer to his identity, his letters pushed them further away. Each letter was a reminder that, despite all the effort and resources invested in the investigation, he remained untouchable. A clear example of this was the letter sent on April 20, 1970, in which he introduced a symbol that would become his iconic signature, a cross within a circle. This symbol, simple yet effective, became a visual representation of the Zodiac, an emblem of his power over collective fear. From that moment on, every letter he sent contained that symbol, as if it were a reminder that he was in control. The most frustrating thing is that, although the Zodiac's letters and cryptograms were analyzed by some of the world's best cryptographers and criminal psychology experts, they never provided the answers everyone was seeking. The Zodiac always stayed one step ahead, as if he knew exactly how to manipulate information to make authorities go around in circles without getting anywhere. And although the letters stopped, the Zodiac's legacy endured. As the years went by and the memories of his crimes faded, the letters remained a tangible reminder of his existence, a piece of evidence that never lost its power. Every time I read those letters, I am overcome with a sense of unease, not just because of the content itself, but because of what they represent, a killer who, despite the authorities' efforts, was never caught, a riddle that remains unsolved. And here arises an important question, a curiosity gap that continues to torment many. If the letters contain any hidden message that we have yet to uncover, what are we missing? Is it possible that the Zodiac left a definitive clue in his final words, something we have yet to interpret? Or perhaps the true answer lies in something much simpler. The Zodiac wanted us to believe there was an answer when, in reality, there never was. Each letter is a window into the mind of a man who delighted in chaos and fear, someone who understood the power of words as much as the power of violence. But the most terrifying thing of all is that, even now, after so many years, we still don't know who the Zodiac really was and what motivated him. Was he simply a man with an insatiable thirst for power and control, or was there something deeper, something we may never fully understand? Modern theories and case reopening. Over the years, theories about the identity of the Zodiac Killer have come and gone like waves on a restless sea. From amateur detectives to professional investigators, everyone has had an opinion on who this enigmatic killer might have been. What surprises me most is how the case remains alive, decades later, fueled by the persistent hope that it will one day be resolved. And today, more than ever, modern theories and technological advances have breathed new life into this endless search. Let's go back to 2007. That year marked a revival of interest in the case, partly due to the film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher. This film not only reignited fascination with the crimes, but also rekindled theories about who the Zodiac was. However, what was most interesting was how new clues and potential suspects began to emerge as more people investigated the case. One of the most discussed theories involves a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a suspect who has been under scrutiny since the early days of the investigation. Allen was a troubled man with a history of violent behavior and tumultuous relationships. There were even certain details about him that matched the Zodiac's profile: the handwriting, his fondness for puzzles, and, most disturbing of all, his proximity to the crimes in the San Francisco Bay Area. I remember first reading about Allen and thinking, this is the guy, it has to be him. The police even interviewed him several times, and his responses were always vague and evasive. However, despite the suspicion surrounding him, no conclusive evidence was ever found to definitively link him to the murders. DNA tests on saliva samples recovered from one of the Zodiac's letters did not match Allen's DNA. This was a major disappointment for those who were convinced of his guilt. Still, the case of Arthur Lee Allen remains one of the most solid for many. However, Allen is not the only suspect to have emerged over the years. Recently, there has been growing attention on another man, Gary Francis Post. This theory began to gain traction in 2021 when a group of investigators known as the Casebreakers claimed that Post was the true Zodiac. The group based their theory on several intriguing elements, including the fact that Post lived in the same area where some of the crimes occurred. They also suggested that there were physical similarities between Post and the Zodiac's composite sketches. What makes Post an interesting suspect is that certain Zodiac anagrams and codes can supposedly be solved using the letters of his name. Additionally, some of Post's acquaintances claimed that he had made disturbing comments about the murders and even hinted that he had trained others to commit similar crimes. Despite the attention this theory has received, there remains significant skepticism. Physical evidence linking him directly to the crimes has yet to be found, and critics argue that the connections made by the casebreakers are too circumstantial. But then, the question arises, what does modern forensic science tell us about this case? Advances in DNA technology have been crucial in solving many cold cases, and the Zodiac case is no exception. In recent years, genetic genealogy, which has gained fame for cases like the Golden State Killer, has offered new hope for unraveling this mystery. By using public DNA databases, investigators have been able to find partial matches leading to possible relatives of suspects. This technique has proven to be a powerful tool in solving crimes that previously seemed unsolvable. In the Zodiac case, DNA samples recovered from his letters have been key. Although results so far have not led to a definitive identification, forensic genealogy experts continue to work tirelessly to track potential matches. It is fascinating to think that, at any moment, a simple DNA analysis could finally reveal who the Zodiac was. However, so far, these tests have only ruled out known suspects, leaving the killer's identity still shrouded in mystery. Another theory that has gained traction in recent years involves the idea that the Zodiac was not a single person but a group of people working together. This theory, although somewhat conspiratorial, is based on the notion that discrepancies in witness descriptions and Zodiac's tactics could suggest the involvement of more than one individual. Proponents of this theory argue that the diversity in the crimes, from gun attacks to stabbings, could indicate that different people were behind each murder. Additionally, the encrypted messages and letters might have been the work of a group member more inclined towards psychological manipulation and mind games. Despite how intriguing this theory sounds, there is little solid evidence to support it. However, in a case so full of unknowns and unexpected twists, it is difficult to dismiss any possibility entirely. And so, we arrive at the big question: why is the Zodiac case still unresolved? As I unravel each theory, each suspect, and each clue, I can't help but wonder if we will ever know the truth. Is it possible that the Zodiac, despite all the effort to capture him, simply vanished, taking his secret to the grave? Or is he still out there, watching as his legacy of terror continues to baffle people? This is the mystery that the Zodiac Killer leaves us with. Despite decades of investigations, theories, and technological advances, his identity remains an enigma. And perhaps that is what makes it so fascinating. The Zodiac was not just a serial killer, he was a master of manipulation, someone who understood the power of fear and control. With each letter, each cipher, and each crime, he kept everyone on edge, never fully revealing his true intentions. Perhaps the most important lesson from this case is that sometimes the darkest mysteries remain unsolved. And while modern technology may offer us new clues, it is possible that the Zodiac won his game, remaining forever as the killer who was never caught. However, the reopening of the case and modern theories give us more than speculation. They give us hope that, perhaps, someday the final pieces of the puzzle will fall into place. Will we witness that resolution? Only time will tell. But in the meantime, the Zodiac Killer's mystery remains a haunting reminder of how far human darkness can reach and how deeply it can root itself in our culture. How close are we really to solving this mystery? Could a simple breakthrough, a new DNA analysis, or a late confession finally close the case? Or perhaps, maybe the Zodiac is still playing with us, laughing from the shadows, knowing that he will always be one step ahead. At this point, after traversing the dark paths of the Zodiac Killer's history, you might, like me, feel caught in a mix of fascination and frustration. Over the past few minutes, we've unearthed chilling stories, explored complex theories, and considered the possibility that we may never know for sure who the Zodiac was. However, there is something I cannot stop thinking about. Beyond the unsolved enigma, beyond the fear these crimes leave us with, there is something profoundly human in our need to solve these mysteries. It is that same curiosity that has kept me awake for nights on end, searching for answers where there seemingly are none. Looking back, each of the clues we've explored, each cryptographic letter, each dubious suspect, makes me reflect on the collective obsession this case has generated. It's incredible how the Zodiac not only left a legacy of terror, but also a deep desire to solve the unsolvable. This is where I find the true reward of this story. Let me explain it this way. The Zodiac knew, more than anything, how to capture our attention, how to create a puzzle that not only scared but kept us intrigued for decades. And, while it is frustrating that this puzzle remains incomplete, I believe there is something valuable in all of this. Perhaps we will never catch the Zodiac, but the journey itself has taught us so much about the nature of fear, control, and psychological manipulation. Think about it. At the end of each crime, after each letter sent, what the Zodiac truly sought was not just to kill. His true objective was to control the narrative, keep everyone in suspense, create a sort of macabre game in which only he had the rules. He was a master of mystery, a puppeteer pulling the strings behind the scenes. And in a way, although his legacy is dark, he has made us more aware of how powerful fear can be and how it can influence our collective minds. The most unsettling part, perhaps, is that the Zodiac knew that, as long as he wasn't caught, his story would live on forever. He trapped us in his web, and here we are, years later, still talking about him, debating his motives, dissecting every detail in search of a truth that seems ever more elusive. It's both terrifying and fascinating. Have you noticed how he has maintained his control over us, even decades after his last letter? Now that we've reached the end, I wonder, what does this story leave us with? How do we process the fact that such a profound mystery remains unresolved? Over time, we've seen other cases closed, serial killers finally brought to justice. But the Zodiac is different. His story, his game of shadows, has withstood the test of time. It has left an indelible mark on popular culture, criminal investigations, and, above all, on our collective psyche. This is where I believe we find the ultimate reward, in the lesson we learn about the mystery itself. Perhaps it's not about solving every enigma. Maybe what's most important is what we learn from trying to solve them. This case has taught us that, while fear can be a powerful tool, so too is curiosity. And as long as we keep asking questions, seeking answers, we are winning the game the Zodiac tried to dominate. Imagine this for a moment. If the case is resolved tomorrow, if we find the killer, will we feel satisfied, or will we lose something in the process? I'm not saying we shouldn't want justice. Of course, we do. The victims and their families deserve it. But what I mean is, as we have navigated this maze of clues and theories, we've realized something important about the human condition. Our need to understand, to untangle the inexplicable, is what defines us. Perhaps that is the true victory we can extract from this story. Is it possible that, on some level, the Zodiac mystery will never be solved because it has already served its purpose? Maybe the true legacy of the Zodiac is not in his identity but in how he forever changed the way we confront fear, secrets, and the unknown. In the end, only you can decide how to process this story. Do you feel frustrated by the unknowns, or do you find value in the fact that we continue to search, that we keep questioning? Maybe the answer will never come, but as long as we keep exploring, we keep moving forward. So, if this endless mystery has captivated you as much as it has me, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What theory seems most plausible to you? What do you think really happened? Leave your comments below, and let's keep deciphering this puzzle together. Who knows, maybe together we'll find that missing piece and finally put an end to the Zodiac's game. And with that, we close this chapter, but not before thanking you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. Perhaps one day we'll uncover the truth, or maybe we'll keep it forever in the shadows, where the Zodiac wanted it to stay.